Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Rob H, and I'm here with
Lee Overstreet, the pinch hitter once again here for AVRant. Happy to be here. Not feeling great, but happy to be alive.
Yeah, well, Lee, thank you so much for filling in. As folks might have guessed, Tom Andry, the normal host of AVRant, is away this week. He's celebrating the 4th of July. I think he said he's actually gone to Washington, D.C. So,
oh, wow.
That's a perfectly appropriate
fun.
place.
That's fun. I've never done D.C. for the 4th. I've done Chicago for the 4th.
Uh-huh.
And that was pretty cool.
So yeah, thank you, Lee, for filling in. Happy 4th of July.
Thank you.
Up. Happy belated Canada Day for the folks in Canada. We celebrated that over the weekend.
I think this might be my favorite holiday because no gifts are expected and the food is good and the weather's warm. You know, all that is fantastic. So, but yes, for everyone listening, I feel a little yucky.
Yeah.
So hopefully I hang in there.
Yes, that's what we're hoping. We're going to get to a whole bunch of questions tonight. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. So, yeah, we're going to jump right into things. We're not going to dilly-dally too much in the hopes that Lee's stomach doesn't catch up with him.
It's okay. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. It was really bad like 8 hours ago. You know that thing where you're like pretty sure you're going to throw up, so you go to the bathroom and sit there and wait? Yeah, I got to that point, but somehow pulled back from the brink. So I'm okay now. I just have a low-level headache. I'm fine. It's good. Let's go AVRant. Yes.
Sounds good. Yes, well, we do try to answer your home theater and AV questions around here, and to get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You send them via email to question@avrant.com. That's how you reach us, question@avrant.com. You can also come to our website. That's avrant.com. You can leave a comment there. You can also see all our show notes. So for products that we recommend, articles that we reference, that sort of thing, that's the resource, avrant.com. We're also available on Facebook. Whoops, that's the wrong camera. There, that's the right camera. All right. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast. And you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at First Reflect. Tom is at AVRant_Tom. And Lee has one of our favorite Twitter handles. Lee, where can folks reach you on Twitter?
On Twitter, I am at Lee Overtweet. You guys Overstreet.
That's right.
So.
It's a pun.
That's a fun little pun.
We point it out every time. Because there's new listeners. People might not
I
realize.
like it. I got to tell you, I kind of like it. I can tell when I'm getting people following me from this show. And I always feel bad. It's like I don't tweet a lot. And I don't always tweet a lot about AV.
Sure.
And so people might, start following me and go, what is this foul-mouthed political crazy person? And why do I care about his dog?
Well, that's okay. None of us tweet all that much, but it's a good place to be able to reach us if you need something quick. So yeah. I tend to respond fairly reasonably quickly. We also have our producer, Austin. He is in charge of all of our YouTube videos. He edits those, puts those up there for people to view afterwards so they can get right down to individual questions and hear our answers on repeat if they want to. So thanks to Austin for doing great work on that. And he can be reached on Twitter as well. He is at Austin Pond. Austin is spelled with a T-E-N, not a T-I-N. Not a T-O-N, a T-E-N. That's how it's spelled. And Pond is just Pond, P-O-N-D. So Austin Pond.
He's like a full double-digit Austin 10.
That's right. That's okay. Right. Austin also has his own podcast. It's called We Watch Movies. So it's very confusing. Has to be explained. Lee, what is that podcast about?
Ironically, it is about gastrointestinal issues that can crop up when you're exposed to viruses and bacteria. And it is fascinating. We're really learning a lot about the gut biome from We Watch Movies.
Very relevant for Lee today.
It really was. I'm so happy that I know that podcast and can learn.
Well, we like to start off our podcast by thanking our listeners of the week. These are people who support the podcast in some way. A great way to help support us is financially. If you come to avrant.com, over on the right-hand side, there is a support the podcast link. That takes you to PayPal. You don't have to have a PayPal account. It'll work with just a credit card. So we have two people to thank who donated this week that I know about. Because, see, I don't actually see all the PayPal receipts. That goes to Tom, so there's a chance other people have donated this week and he just didn't clue me in because he's away.
We'll mention him next week. We'll give him
that's right. That's right. Absolutely let us know if we left your name out because Tom will forget. But Russell and Ian. I know Russell and Ian donated to the podcast this week, so thanks very much, guys.
Yeah.
And you don't have to support us financially. You can support the podcast in some other way, like David
by making us famous.
That's right. David B, he bought a PC 2000 subwoofer from SVS, nice cylinder subwoofer, and he let them know that that was thanks to AVRant. So that's a great way to help support the podcast. Scott B did a similar thing. He bought his uncle an HSU VTF2 Mark V, another very nice subwoofer. He told HSU that was because of AVRant, and he wanted to let people know HSU really went above and beyond. When Scott placed his order, the delivery pickup driver for that day had just left HSU's warehouse like 2 minutes earlier. So they actually got on the phone, they called the driver on his cell phone, had him turn around, come back, bring the truck back, pick up the subwoofer that Scott had just ordered, all so that he could receive it as quickly as possible, wouldn't have to wait an extra day. So
that really is nice. I mean, they can't be too huge of a corporation if they can make that quick, nimble change. That's like that. I like that a lot. And I would also like to be Scott's uncle because
that's right.
Nice. Very nice.
Scott says his uncle does love the new subwoofer, and that is highly understandable. That's a very nice sub. So,
and don't let me forget my SVS question at some point.
Well, you know what? Why don't we just jump into it now? We're a question and answer podcast. We can do that right now.
Okay, sure. And then we can do news and more questions.
That's right.
So my question is, I happen to notice in the SVS owner's manual for the PC 2000 that David just got, and presumably others must say this, that SVS themselves show optimal placement for two subs to be the front corners of the room.
Right, front left and front right corners.
That is not what this podcast has been preaching. Best balance of bass volume and accuracy, it says, showing exactly that. Put them in the corners, in the front. So why are they saying that? It seems really ironic that a podcast that always recommends SVS and recommends the opposite of what SVS says do with their subwoofer.
It has been a bone of contention. We asked Gary Yakubian, the president and CEO of SVS, we asked directly about that. If you go to their website and you look at their why go dual subwoofer sort of FAQ there, they list sort of like 3 options for where to place subwoofers. We largely agree with the 3 options. We just don't agree with the order in which they're given. So they have what we recommend, which is the middle of the front wall and the middle of the back wall, or the middle of the left wall and the middle of the right wall. They mention that, which is our #1 recommendation.
Well, they mentioned that for a single sub. I see.
Yeah, but they mentioned it for duals as well.
I didn't see that in the PC 2000.
Probably not in the manual. It's on their website, though.
Oh, yeah. That's it. Okay.
Yeah, so they like I say, on their website, they do mention it, but it's like their third, it's like #3 in the list, whereas it'd be #1 on the list for us. Right. And they do, I have seen that same thing, the 2 front corners. Right now, on AVRant, we say, hey, 2 subs pretty much always better than 1. If you can't do the middle of the front wall, middle of the back wall, or the middle of the 2 side walls, or diagonally opposite corners, if you can't do that, if you can't have the 2 subs across the room from one another, then having them both at the front or both at the back is okay. It's still better than 1 subwoofer. You're just probably going to have to play with the phase knob on the sub a little bit to get the most uniform, not necessarily linear right away, but the most uniform bass. From seat to seat. That's what we're after with 2 subs. Uniform bass from seat to seat. So, yeah, it's a little bit more than a nitpick, but it's not a complete disagreement. It's like we mention the same options, we just rank them in a different order. Now, they have the point of, for most people, this is probably going to be more convenient. The middle of the front wall, middle of the back wall, probably not convenient for a lot of people.
Right. That doesn't work.
The whole thing of somehow getting the wire all the way to the middle of the back of your room, or messing around with a wireless setup. Like, there are logistical reasons why having them both up at the front, where the rest of your equipment probably is, and it's probably easier to run your wires and that. It's not like those are completely neither here nor there, right? It's like, yeah, that's a consideration.
It's all a consideration. It's very rare for any individual to be in their home and have multiple places where they can put subs. When the day comes that I get 2 subs to add to my speakers that I feel like don't even need subs, my big 15-inch woofers, there's really only a couple of places they can go. And the first thing I'm going to try is the one that looks the best. And then if I'm unhappy, then I start moving it around and putting more science to it. If I'm happy with the prettiest location, I'll stick with that. We'll see. That's
so So I will just say it is a bone of contention. We voiced it. They've chosen to stick with what they say. We've chosen to stick with what we say. I don't think we're like miles apart from each other in the recommendation.
It sounds like they just haven't updated the manual. They've got more information and more detail on the website.
That's true.
So they just need to throw another little page in the manual about that. That sounds like what's okay. Well, that answers my question.
Just change it to what we want, but
just put what AVRant says.
but yeah, that's that. So yeah, why don't we head on into the news, because there's a couple of fun stories.
Yeah, this is fun. Nintendo announced the SNES Classic. So a Super Nintendo, another miniature console, this time with 21 SNES games preloaded, including Star Fox 2, which has never been released before.
Yeah.
2 controllers with 5-foot cords, not really long.
No, but the last one was only 3 feet long, so they've improved a little bit.
Right, and an $80 price tag. Seems kind of fair. It'll be in stores September 29th, although pre-orders have already started. And while Nintendo has said they'll manufacture, quote, significantly more units compared to last year's NES Classic Edition, they've also said they'll stop making SNES Classic units at the end of 2017.
Yeah.
So it's this year or never.
Yeah, it's very much still limited. I would bet. I would be willing to bet that they will not make enough for everyone who wants to buy one. They're still going to end up on eBay.
The only thing I don't love about these things, these little miniatures, is they're too light. They don't stay on the surface of anything.
Right. Yeah, the HDMI cable on the back is heavier than they are.
Right, exactly. So I think if I could just somehow put like a heavy piece of steel underneath it with some rubber or something.
Undo the screws, put a little piece of lead inside.
Yeah, something. Because but that's like a thing that happens a lot in recent years, where the object that's generating your image or your sound is smaller than everything attached to it. It's true for like a Chromecast or for a little iPod, or and so it gets kind of silly. Your cords are moving everything around. Your 5-foot cords are definitely going to pull this little thing off the
I'm still a little bit down on Nintendo. I don't like this whole like falsely withholding manufacturing to drum up demand. I'm not a fan of doing that. It's like, just let people buy the thing instead of having to scalp it off of eBay for hundreds of dollars when it shouldn't cost that much. But see, I don't know, when people got the NES Classic last year, right away people figured out how to just flash the ROM and put a whole bunch of pirated NES ROMs on there, and other systems too, because it's just a fairly
and that'll happen
regular chip inside. But I wonder, when you do that, would that erase what was on there originally? Because I think that's what they're trying to do with the whole Star Fox 2 thing, because you can't get a pirated Star Fox 2 ROM anywhere because it was never resleased anywhere. So maybe that's like their attempt to stop the piracy machine.
Hey, that's a good point. If you so won't somebody just copy the ROM out of it and then add that to a collection?
I'm sure.
Some genius will do that, won't they? Yeah.
But that's, I don't know. Who knows? Anyway,
but still, frankly, $80 to have fun with that is probably
21 games. Not such a tremendous value, but
depends on your how you feel about the past.
Yeah,
nostalgia. So more news. Netflix has added support for Dolby Atmos for one movie.
Yeah, at the moment.
At the moment, there's just the one movie. Is it Okja or Okja?
It's Korean. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Most things are similar to Japanese, so I think Okja. I think
I'm gonna say Okja. But 4 more have been announced, and Netflix expects the catalog to grow over time. That makes sense. There's also very limited hardware support at this early stage, so you can go with an Xbox One and an Xbox One S. They can output Dolby Atmos audio, but they can't output Dolby Vision. You get HDR10 instead. So right this red hot second, only the 2017 LG OLED TVs support both at the same time. That's a smart TV that can do them both. And LG OLED support Dolby Vision, and they can decode and play back Dolby Atmos internally. Let me see, I've lost my why did my page just jump?
I didn't touch anything.
For no reason. What happened there? Anyway, so they can decode and play back Dolby Atmos internally or pass the Dolby Digital Plus with Atmos extension signal to an Atmos AV receiver via HDMI ARC. So that audio return channel can send that back to a receiver that is so equipped. So that's kind of cool. And I can't wait. One of these days, I'm getting me an LG OLED. It's got to get down another $500-600 because right now it's about $3,000 or $3,300 for that 2017 edition.
Right.
It's a little bit more. So I'm gonna hang in there. My old plasma will do me well a little longer. Also, since Vizio TVs support Dolby Vision and can pass Dolby Digital Plus signals via HDMI ARC, They'll almost certainly support Atmos on Netflix in the near future. The Netflix app needs to be updated is all. And so it's a matter of firmware update.
Yeah, and we have some people who are big fans of the Xbox One, and they're like, should be able to add Dolby Vision support to it, so they're always encouraging us to go over to that Xbox user voice and vote on the thing that says, we want Dolby Vision added. So who knows? I mean, we've seen features get added to the thing. I don't know how responsible the, petitions are in getting that done, but, at least they have, over at Microsoft, added features to that box, so can't hurt.
One would hope somebody's job is to look at the suggestions.
You would think.
I mean, why would you say, hey, come give us suggestions, and then just like, nah, screw you, not reading. Hopefully some intern has to go read it and report to a superior, and if they see enough of the same complaint or idea.
But yeah, it was only a couple episodes ago we were saying that, getting Dolby Atmos from the streaming services, that there weren't really very many options. And so here we go. Netflix has begun. It's not a whole lot of movies that are supported yet. The movies that have been announced are only movies that they are funding themselves. But it's a beginning, so that you got to start somewhere.
We're in a new age because at my house, the Netflix picture quality and sound is now better than Comcast. Because Netflix is doing 1080p, and Comcast, almost all the channels are 720p on Comcast here.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Almost all of them, except for some channels that must have had some agreement that said you can't. The broadcast 1080i channels are 1080i, and NFL, and any NBC sports channel. So there's just a handful of things that are... and we're at the point now, Netflix looks better, which is weird for me. All right, so we got some comments from people. Jim B wrote to us a couple weeks ago trying to figure out how to connect his Vintage Techniques Spectrum Analyzer to his sound system, which is awesome. Literally just so he could have its pretty bouncing lights going for purely aesthetic reasons. I get it, man. He got it working, so he shared a short video clip for everybody to enjoy, and I'm sure we can link to that, or
that'll get edited in if I decide to do that, or we'll have a quickly. It's like 10 seconds long.
Maybe we could put it in now.
I wasn't set up to screen share any of that, so no, we're not going to do that. But
no, I meant later when it's edited.
I see. Yes. Yeah, sure. I'll try.
But it does look very cool. I assume he took like a record out from the amp and analog stereo output.
Yeah, we went through this whole thing where the regular pre-outs weren't sending like a high enough voltage signal.
Oh.
So he basically put it into like a headphone amp just to boost it. Like, it doesn't have to be a high quality headphone amp. It could be noisy even, wouldn't really matter. All these after are the lights. Yeah. So
you just want some reasonable facsimile of the actual frequencies.
That's right.
All right. Well, that's very cool, and I appreciate that.
Oh, I'm all for that kind of stuff. That's fun.
I kind of miss all that stuff. You just don't get any pretty stuff anymore. You just don't. Anyway, from last week, some questions. Grant A, all the way around the world in New Zealand, all the way around the world from me. He's not around the world from his friends. Grant A has a Pioneer SC LX59 AV receiver. It's a 9.2 channel Atmos model that uses Pioneer's Class D amps. Every once in a while, it'll just cut out in the middle of a movie. Not every movie, and only ever once per movie. But it was enough to get him to check the troubleshooting section of the manual, which did suggest activating the receiver's, quote, digital safety feature if you experience audio dropouts during loud playback. Activating so-called digital safety can't even be done in the regular user menu. You have to hold down the enter button while pressing the standby button, and then use the front panel controls to navigate to D safety. Everybody should practice good D safety. And then select settings 1, 2, or off.
Right.
Just 1, 2, or off. 1 of what? 2 of what? We don't know.
That's right.
So he tried 1. That's a good place to start. And he's never had another audio dropout happen. But he'd like to know what this setting actually does, as would I. The manual doesn't explain what's actually happening. So could the digital safety be affecting the performance of his amplifiers in some way? Should it be using 2 instead of 1? And then my question, if there's a chance your amp might cut out and you know that, why not just make 1 the default?
Well,
what is it doing wrong?
So this seems... I am not 100% on this, because I couldn't find a straightforward, this is exactly what this setting is doing.
People have been asking this for quite some time online on forums. I took a quick gander, and people have been mad about this for a while. What is this?
But
to me, why do you put in a feature to make it stop doing a thing it should never do?
Right.
Just make that the default.
First of all, I want to give out the normal info, the normal disclaimer, which is that if you are playing some music or a movie or something like that and your receiver suddenly goes into protection mode, suddenly shuts itself off, and there's usually a red light blinking somewhere, normally that's a short circuit. Normally there is one tiny little strand of speaker wire, might not even be at the receiver. It could be on the speaker end.
Right.
That's
what you told me at the time I had a problem like that. In the middle of a movie, it just went poof.
Yes. So that typically, that's what it is. And I know everybody hates to check their speaker wire connections, but that is 99% of the time the reason. Now, this sounds a little bit different. And again, I'm not 100% on it, but from everything I could find on it, this is what it seems to be. It seems to be very similar to like Onkyo or Yamaha's speaker impedance setting, in that it appears to be a current choke.
Even though it's called digital safety.
Well, because it's these Class D amplifiers, and they're using this digital power supply.
Okay. Okay.
So, or at least a switching mode power supply.
Yeah.
So, like I say, I'm not 100%, but that's what it seems to be. In particular, the description between what 1 and 2 does, because those super descriptive, 1 and 2, it does mention if you are using lower impedance speakers like a 4 ohm or a electrostatic speaker or something like that dips way down, and the 1 setting still ends up with shutoffs happening, to try the 2 setting.
And that has to be what it is. That's the only thing that makes sense.
It really seems like that's what it is. And it
for low impedance speakers, that's got to be what it is.
Well, basically, and all that setting is in other receivers where they call it the speaker impedance setting rather than the digital safety setting. All it's doing is enacting a current choke. It's limiting the number of amps that are allowed to flow through the output transistors of the amplifiers, which keeps the heat down and makes sure that nothing ever exceeds the capabilities and the heat dissipation ability of the AV receiver. So normally our suggestion is to leave it off, or in the case of ones that are labeled as speaker impedance, to leave it at the highest setting, which is usually 6 or 8 ohms, because that way you're not choking the current. But if you're getting shutdowns due to overheating, well, that's worse, isn't it, than just limiting your headroom somewhat.
So it's frustrating. If that's really what it is, why in the world would Pioneer not make it where you could match it up to something in the real world? Because on my Yamaha amp, it says 6 ohms or 8 ohms. And I looked on the back of my speakers and it said 6 ohms. And you go, well, that's
I'm not sure. I mean, my speculation would be because Class D amplifiers don't behave exactly the same way Class AB amplifiers do. In particular, Class D amplifiers really struggle when high frequencies have a low impedance, which is kind of rare. It's unusual for that to be the case, but that's an area where they tend to struggle, whereas Class E amplifiers, AB amplifiers typically don't. So it could just have... they just chose to call it something else. Because even if you have a speaker that's, let's say you have a speaker that's nominally rated at 6 ohms, and they gave you a 6 ohm setting, but for some reason its high frequencies have a low impedance, then you still might shut off with a Class D amplifier, right? So maybe that's purely guesswork on my part.
That actually, I mean, it's plausible, makes sense.
I mean, it's a somewhat educated stab in the dark.
No, that's a good educated stab.
Grant, I'm not 100% sure that's what's going on, but it makes sense. It fits the scenario and it fits the description of the difference between 1 and 2. So I think that's what's going on. And ultimately, if setting it to 1 has solved your problem, then that's really what matters. And it makes sense that
if it sounds good and it solved the problem, you wanted one of those.
Yeah.
Whatever that is. I'd like 1 digital safety unit, please. 1. Thank you. All right. Good enough. Let's move on to Kevin H. Kevin bought an $80 mini LED projector. Neato. Didn't even know you could get one for $80. He uses it in his bedroom, shooting onto the coffee-colored walls. Now, is that coffee with cream or is that black coffee? I think it's coffee with cream. After
those. I mean, we're seeing an image taken from a camera, so we don't know what the camera's doing with the white balance and exposure.
But looking at the white door there, I'm guessing that's coffee with cream. So
looks like doesn't look like super dark espresso or something.
No, it's not deep, rich black coffee. Okay, so he says it looks decent, and looking at his pictures, I'm surprised he gets that
when the lights are off, that's looking entirely watchable.
But he says it probably would look better on a more neutral paint color, right? Yes. because you can't get a true white. Although your eyeballs and your brain do an amazing job of white balancing.
True.
It is true. Like that's a lot of the battle right there. So, but yes, it is true that you're getting a off color. He's found one suggestion: Bare Premium Plus Ultra French Silver Interior Semi-Gloss Enamel. That's a fancy name for a paint. It's ultra French. It says it right there. No paint's ever been so French as this paint. Okay, it's not a critical viewing area, he says. So is it a good choice? I say no.
So that is a somewhat common recommendation that's been out there, using this sort of silver tinted paint. That I've seen that recommendation before. So before we go into paint, I want to mention something that not everybody's going to think of, but it's actually a very accurate in terms of not shifting your colors any one way or giving a tint to anything, which is Wilson Art laminate finish, like what you might put on a countertop. If you get their designer white laminate, which you can get in a big sort of 4x8 type slab, and therefore you could just trim it to whatever size that you want for your screen, it's actually a really decent DIY screen material.
Really? I would think the texture of it is so...
No, well, it's this particular, their designer white laminate in a matte finish.
So it's really smooth.
Really smooth, really neutral white, so it doesn't tint the color. So if you want something that could potentially be taken down later, that would be one to look at.
I'm looking at his picture, and it kind of looks like the wall in question isn't a huge wall.
Right.
I'm just guessing. He didn't give us like a wide shot or blueprint, but it doesn't look like a huge wall. What I would do is I would run down to Walmart and buy a $10 to $15 can of matte finish, at the most eggshell finish white paint. That's what I would do. Because if you put silvery stuff on that wall, I don't know what your style committee is like at home, but coffee colored everything else and have one accent of silver sounds weird to me.
Right.
Now, that's just that's a personal opinion. If you don't mind it there and you like the silver better, but I would just get any inexpensive white paint would easily color your coffee with cream with a couple of coats and would do just fine. It would be an improvement, but I wouldn't go spend $35 or $100 on a can of paint for an $80 projector.
Right. Well, that's probably fine. Over at Projector Central, they went pretty in depth.
Of course.
That's what they do. Now, they actually specifically mentioned the bare silver paint. Right. It might have been a very slightly different finish or something along those, but it was essentially what was just mentioned there. And they're like, it alters the color a little bit. It's not exactly what they ended up thinking was the right choice. So they went through a whole bunch of options, and they landed on the same brand of paint that I recommend for painting your walls, which is Sherwin-Williams. For whatever reason, Sherwin-Williams, just like basic bright white, or extra white, they call it. Their extra white base is really, really neutral. So they're starting with a really, really neutral white, which means that if you tint it gray, you get a really, really neutral gray.
Sure.
Which is great for your walls if you're going to have a projection set up and you don't want your walls to impart any sort of tint to the color in your room. Then Sherwin-Williams, for whatever reason, they have a really neutral. So since you want white, they went through the whole thing. Now it's their Pro Classic interior acrylic enamel, which is actually labeled right on the can for finishing your door trim and like the baseboard trim and that. So it's that kind of little bit more durable, but also smoother finish. That's what they're going after. The same thing you mentioned, they don't want texture. Right?
Yeah, I wouldn't want shiny either. I wouldn't want semi-gloss.
Yeah, no, so they said to avoid semi-gloss. They found satin gave you a nice mix of a little bit of gain, but not too much that it's actually looking like shiny and hotspot-y.
Exactly, yeah. You wouldn't want that.
Sherwin-Williams, which should be widely available to you, Pro Classic interior acrylic enamel for door trim. That's what it'll say. The extra white in the satin finish. That's what they recommend. You don't need an entire gallon of it. Just get a quart.
Okay, but I'm also here to tell you, I like to advocate for the cheapos of the world. I'm telling you what.
It's still pretty cheap. A quart of that is pretty cheap.
$50 for that
gallon. For a gallon.
A quart is pretty cheap, but I'm telling you, I bet you couldn't tell the difference if you went to Walmart and said, I want the pure white
Not
base,
unless you had it side by side,
And and then tinted just a little bit gray, maybe 25% gray or something like that, or 10% gray. And here's just an interesting layman's question. why is it that screens are somewhat shiny gray, silver? Why aren't
like in a full-size movie theater?
Or every screen I've ever seen is not pure white. Almost every screen. Cheaper ones I've seen pure white. I've seen like in my wife's library at the middle school. That's mostly a white screen. She pulls down.
I see. Like the pull-down screens you'd see at a classroom and stuff like that.
Yeah, those tend to be more white. So why is silver seem to be the color?
Well, there's the whole thing of the silver screen, isn't there?
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's a few reasons. When it comes to like projecting for a movie screen, particularly in a full-size commercial movie theater, the silver preserves polarized light. So if you're doing 3D and you're doing something like Real D 3D or IMAX 3D where they're using polarized glasses, you have to preserve the polarized light for that to work. If you had just a basic white screen, it wouldn't preserve the polarized light. 3D wouldn't work. So that's one reason. Other one, it does give you extra gain. If you're talking about a very large screen, then you need the extra gain so that more of the light is reflected back in towards the middle, back towards the audience rather than being directed off, incidence angle.
In other words, the light bounces back from the direction it came.
It's not entirely retro-reflective, but more of the light goes back towards the middle.
It's not as scattered to the wide
That's
angles.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the main reasons you see it in a full-size movie theater, or why some of the home screens are. But a lot of the home screens are just a basic white, because if you're using an active 3D system where you have the 3D shutter glasses, or no 3D at all, like most people, then you're not worried about that. But yeah.
But for an $80 projector, grab you any old good white paint. If you feel like tinting it a little bit gray, do it. But remember,
that's Lee's advice. I'm saying go for the Sherwin-Williams because it's widely available, and it really doesn't cost much more for a quart.
I know, but I would just say, I'm saying white without any gray because it won't match your coffee. So, and then you have coffee and cream. It'll look kind of good. Call it the de-accented wall. All right, so moving on to Charles. Charles has his projector connected to his AV receiver via HDMI. I'm assuming his is not an $80 little Pico projector. His sources are DirecTV and a DVD player, and everything has been working fine. He got an Amazon Fire Stick, and when he plugged it into the available HDMI port on the receiver, I assume, he got picture but no sound. Any suggestions? Yeah, man, there's... you start with the basic troubleshooting.
Yeah, well, plug
it back in first.
My real basic question here is, did he plug it into the HDMI port on his projector?
Yeah, that's
because
notice what I said. I said I assume on the receiver.
Yeah, and I don't, because if you're just reading the quick start guide for the Amazon Fire Stick, it says plug this into an HDMI port on your display. That's what it says to do.
Yep.
His display in his case is a projector. His projector does not have any means of sending the audio from the projector back to the receiver. It doesn't have HDMI audio return channel. So I'm wondering
it's that simple.
If it's that simple.
It
very easily could be.
Right.
And like, it's an easy thing to do. It's like, hey, the quick start guide said to plug this into my display. I plugged it into my display. I got a picture. I didn't get any sound.
That makes perfect sense. And that's an easy thing to do. And I understand why anybody would do it.
For sure.
I've had great luck with my Chromecast in the back of my cheapo Yamaha receiver. Unless there's something terribly wrong with that stick, it should make sound.
Now, if he has in fact taken the Amazon Fire Stick and plugged it into one of the HDMI ports on his AV receiver, which, by the way, Charles, that's what you should do if you haven't. But that's where the Amazon Fire Stick should plug in. It should plug into the back of your AV receiver, one of the AV receiver's HDMI inputs. Now, if that's what you've done and you're still getting picture but no sound, you might want to check the setup menu for your AV receiver, because it is possible to assign an audio input to a given HDMI port. For example, you can say, for HDMI port number 5, use the optical audio input, right? That's something you can do on most AV receivers, at which point it'll say, well, now when you switch to HDMI input 5, I'm going to go looking for the audio signal on the optical input port. I'm not going to go looking for it on the HDMI port.
Yep.
And sometimes by default, that's just the way it's set up, particularly for the auxiliary HDMI input. Very often that by default is set to one of the coaxial digital audio inputs or one
Really?
of the optical audio inputs. So it could be as simple as making sure the setting for whatever HDMI input you've used on the back of your AV receiver is set to use that same HDMI input for the audio.
That would be frustrating and also not Charles's fault.
Oh,
because
God,
that seems really mean. Like I didn't know some defaulted away from the HDMI port like
Yup.
that for the audio. That's crazy.
Yep.
That's rude.
That's what they do.
That is not fair.
Like I say, in particular ones that are labeled auxiliary, that's often the case.
Huh. Okay.
So yeah, and yeah, absolutely no blame either way, Charles. This is not as plug and play and easy as it ought to be. We 100% agree on that.
Right.
But those would be my suspects, and hopefully that'll solve the problem.
Yeah, let us know, Charles. Some new questions for this week, now that we're 45 minutes into this. New for this week, Mark in. Mark has several elements to his question. He recently bought a Polk PSW505 subwoofer and decided to try pairing it with his old Onkyo 10-inch sub, the last survivor of his original home theater in a box system.
Yep.
Interesting. He bought a simple RCA Y splitter and hooked them up to the single subwoofer output on his AV receiver. That sounds reasonable. When he powered everything on, he immediately noticed a low hum coming from the Onkyo sub. He's tried plugging the Onkyo into a different outlet and swapping the input cables between the two subs and even moving the subs around the room, but the hum remains. The Onkyo sub stops humming when it goes into standby, but as soon as it turns on, it hums. Could the Y splitter be to blame, and should he buy a better one from Blue Jeans? I bet it's not. But can it be? Can it be, technically speaking?
The chances of the Y splitter causing the hum directly, as in if you used a different Y splitter, this wouldn't happen.
I doubt that.
Almost certainly not.
Right.
No.
And my first question is, did you try it with just the Onkyo and by itself with a straight cable?
Well, it seems as though he did, because that was his previous setup. Prior to all this, he didn't have the Polk. He only had the Onkyo.
Right, but I'm just saying, maybe somehow, is it possible that the Onkyo wasn't causing a hum when it was hooked up to the...
Like he just wasn't using it before?
Or it wasn't humming, but somehow the Polk does. I don't know. I'm just trying to step through this.
No, he had the Onkyo prior. He didn't mention that it ever hummed when it was all by itself.
Okay.
He bought this Polk, he connected the two of them, and now the Onkyo hums for some reason.
I would just want to know for sure, does the Polk hum on its own?
Well, I mean, it's not humming right now. It's only the Onkyo that's humming, which is the one he already had before. And it wasn't humming before.
Oh, the Onkyo is... I'm sorry, I'm confused. I thought the new sub was... Okay.
No. New sub doesn't hum. Old sub didn't used to hum, but now when they're together, the old one hums.
Well, this is easy. It's jealous. It's jealous of the new sub. It's what's happening. Okay, so he's read about ground loop isolation transformers like the one made by Blue Jeans Cable, but doesn't want to buy one if it isn't likely to solve the problem. What do you think, Rob?
I think it is likely to solve the problem. It
Really?
It does sound like what you have is a difference in ground potential between sub number 1 and sub number 2. And of course, sub number 1 and sub number 2 are now electrically connected because they're sharing this Y splitter, this output. So it does seem like the likely culprit. Now, he's like, I don't want to buy this thing if it isn't likely to solve the problem. Well, luckily, you can buy it off of Amazon and return it if it doesn't work.
Oh, okay.
So to me,
I guess that's worth trying.
It's worth a shot, because it very likely this definitely does sound like a ground loop, essentially.
It really does. Especially if it's that deep hum that we all know and love. That's right there near the brown note. Is it even worth bothering with this Onkyo 10-inch sub from the home theater in a box system? That's also another question that pops into my head. Is he gaining anything? Is it helping with uniformity? It's not going to make it significantly louder or more powerful.
No. And the Polk PSW 505, it is a 12-inch sub. It's not tremendously powerful. It doesn't play tremendously lower than the Onkyo, but it is a little bit more powerful. It does play a little bit louder and lower. So you do sort of end up with a case of lowest or weakest link in the chain, you might say.
Yeah.
You're as far as what your dual subs are doing, you are somewhat limited by the Onkyo.
I don't know that it's worth the trouble or the space if you had
or the
two
cost,
pokes.
right? Like
Yeah,
take the $45-$50 that would go towards the ground loop isolator and save it up to put towards a second sub to replace the Onkyo. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Because are you really gaining that much by leaving the Onkyo 10-inch sub in there? After all, it's a home theater and a box sub. It's not a...
As home theater and a box subs go, the Onkyos were half decent.
Oh, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just questioning whether this is worth the trouble. No, I don't know.
That's a tough call. I would say you can make an argument either way, because I'd say particularly if you're in a fairly small room, and particularly if you care about more than one seat, then there's some benefit to be had here. Sure. But yeah, you can certainly make the argument, especially if you really only care about one seat. If you're the only person who really cares about your primary seat, then I do have to agree with at least spending any amount of money to eliminate a hub in a sub that you can probably just eliminate from the system entirely. Right. Yeah, you're right.
Because there are a lot of situations, families, roommates, situations where there's really only one person that cares if it sounds like a home theater.
Yeah.
And everybody else could not possibly be bothered. Right. In which case, do that subwoofer crawl, get it perfect for you and where you like to sit. And then everybody else can, eat cake.
I'm not going to say it's cut and dry. You must do one or the other, because you can make an argument either way. But when we're talking about subwoofers of this price class, spending upwards of $45-$50 to ground loop isolate the lesser sub. Yeah, it's.
I bring that up because I'm not just cheap. I'm cheap and lazy. So if it's easier, I'm going to go easier.
But if this is what you want to do, Mark, and there's an argument to do it, then I do believe the ground loop isolator would help solve this issue. And if it doesn't, you can return it if you buy it from Amazon. So I wouldn't call it a complete waste of time to try it.
Also, Mark asked what brand and type of banana plugs we recommend, and Rob has some very good suggestions here. I like the looks of the first one you linked us to.
Sure. So Tom in particular really likes to use locking banana plugs. So these ones, what happens if you look at the tip of that barrel up at the end there, you actually rotate this sort of gray collar. So you rotate that, and that splays out the end. Up there, you see those sort of pins that are horizontal across the top there? It's a little
like a molly bolt when you're hanging a picture on drywall.
That's right. That's right. So that collar goes up, it pushes those pins up, and that splays out the top, so it locks in. Really secure connection, and it'll basically never wear out unless you completely overcrank it and break it. The one downside is that when you're first putting the speaker wire into it, it's using these little screws to hold in the bare speaker wire, and then you got to tighten down the collar, so the whole thing takes a little bit longer.
Yeah, it's a little fiddly, but it looks really good.
But it's really good. Yeah,
it looks high end. I like the look of it. The only thing is, if you don't have any space behind your speaker, you probably do, unless it's mounted right up against the wall. I can see that kind of sticking out far.
Potentially, yeah. Maybe. But but I like to go even cheaper, because those ones you can get 10 pairs that they
you get 10 red, 10 black, and you get that for $36.
Yeah, so that's not a crazy price. That seems reasonably affordable for 10 pairs of those. But I like to go even cheaper. I like Sewell. Sewell has some banana plugs that they call Strike. That's just the name of them. They're really, really short, so they're convenient if you don't have a lot of space behind. And they're just your very basic, it's a spring, basically, that's holding it in there. So if you're plugging and unplugging a whole bunch of times, it is possible to wear down that spring. But they're so cheap.
Yeah.
That I pretty much don't care. And what I like most about them is they're super fast to install. That's what I like about them.
Yeah, no, there you go. That's for my lazy thing.
So all you do, you strip the wire, you feed the wire in through the bottom. It has this wedge of metal inside. You tighten it down, you're done. It's like there's no screws to adjust. There's no collar to adjust. It's the fastest that I've come across. Speaking of fast, I do also like to mention wire strippers.
Yeah.
Nyko make some self-adjusting wire strippers. I even made a short little video just demonstrating how they work.
I did see your video, and I would not have guessed that's how they work. And I kind of want these strippers now, being a big fan of strippers.
There you go. I think we found a title. Really
yeah, big fan of strippers. It's better than gastrointestinal as a title. Yeah, no, those look really cool. Any size that it is, it'll pry it right off.
Yeah, and it never touches the the metal inside or anything. So 16
Amazing.
bucks.
Yeah.
If you're going to be stripping any number of leads, it's not a huge investment. I love those things. So yeah,
I want those. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and add those to a cart right now just to remind me. I'm not kidding. Like those look really.
He doesn't care about the banana plugs that we're asked about, just the wire strippers. That's the fun part.
Right.
But yeah,
right.
no,
No,
they're fantastic.
I'm talking about for Lee. I'm the center of the universe. What matters is what I'm interested in, right?
But yeah, those GLS brand locking banana plugs that Tom really likes, $35 for 10 pairs of those. Yeah. The Strike banana plugs from Sewell that I really like, 7 pairs for 12 bucks. So even cheaper. Yeah. You can also get them in a 14 pair pack. So that comes out to what, $22? So you're even saving a little bit more money there. So I really like them because they're super fast to install and they're so cheap that even if you wear them out, who really cares? You just throw in another pair.
Kind of makes me want to convert everything from bare wire to banana plugs. I just have bare wire now, but yeah, it looks really
the
cool.
Chances of having that one little stray strand go down. So.
You're right. And I know, well, back when you told me, and I told you about my problem of the amplifier shutting off, and you're like, check and see if you've got everything installed right. Boy, it hits you in your pride.
Yes.
And you don't want to go look. You're like, because God dang, I'm
believe me, Tom and I have both done it many times.
I will be crushed if I find out I did it wrong. But I didn't do it wrong. So. Hooray. Anyway, moving on to David B. on Facebook. David has finished his basement home theater room, and now it's time to connect and configure his speakers. That's exciting. He's using a Marantz SR5011, and he has 7 speakers total. The front 3 speakers are easy. And by the way, on the podcast here, we're showing the deconstructed room.
That's how it started, and then it's quite the transformation, huh?
His finished room is just sexy. I'm just here to tell you. It's the red and black color theme. I dig, man. I'm into
it. Reminds me a little bit of, what would it be, like maybe 2001?
Yeah, a little 2000. But for me, it's a little 80s retro. Like I want a Nagel picture hanging. Anyway, front 3 speakers are easy. They clearly connect to the front left, front right, and center speaker binding posts. But the 4 remaining speakers are all in ceiling. Since his couch is up against the back wall, 2 of the in ceiling speakers are basically in line with his couch, like right over his head. And they're about 3 feet out to either side of the couch. The last 2 speakers are about 4 feet in front of the couch and the same width apart as the front left and right speakers. Which speakers get wired to which binding post on the back of his Marantz, and what should they be called in the speaker setup menu? Now, that is a very good question. My first instinct is that those that are right above your head and off to the sides, that's awful close to where just regular surround speakers are supposed to go. And so my instinct would be to just make those, like in a regular 5.1 system, make those your surround speaker.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, he's got an SR 5011, which can connect 7 speakers, and that's it. That's where it maxes out. Can't do 9, can't do 11, so he tops out at 7 speakers. Okay. Absolutely right. The front 3, fairly obvious. That's your front left, center, front right. But yes, the 2 speakers that are more or less directly over your couch and spread wide apart, those should be connected to your surround left and surround right binding posts. There you go. Now, the 2 speakers that are in the ceiling in front of your couch a little ways and closer together.
When he's sitting on the couch, they're 4 feet in front of his face and up on the ceiling.
That's correct. Yeah,
that's right.
That's where they are. Those should be your Atmos speakers, and I would probably label them as top fronts. Because the way that the angles work out, that's where they're going to be.
Because they're in front of you. They may not be in the front of the room, but they're in front of you.
That's right. So, yeah, the little tricky part is that on the back of the Marantz SR5011, there are no speaker binding posts that say top fronts. They say surround back. That's what they're labeled. And those are the ones you have to use for your top front speakers.
Your top front speakers are labeled
surround back on the back of that Marantz AV receiver. Those, the ones that say surround back are assignable.
Okay.
Right? So they can be assigned. Those could end up being your zone 2 speakers. They could be front heights. They could be top fronts. They could be top middles. They could be Dolby enabled upward firing front speakers. Those are the assignable speaker binding posts. So it is, I completely understand someone being confused. They're like, I have 2 more left over that say surround back. Not only that, if I went from the front of the room to the back of the room, why are the ones that are up in front of me connected to the binding posts that say back? All of this stuff is understandably confusing.
Much like that Pioneer earlier that should have labeled things differently.
Right.
They should have said surround back / assignable.
Yeah, and it might even be written on there assignable somewhere, but nevertheless, your front three, pretty self-explanatory. The two that are over your couch and spread wide apart, those are connected to your surround, left and right. And the two that are in the ceiling in front of you, physically connect to the binding posts that say surround back. And when you do the setup, you should call them top fronts. So that's the solution here.
Makes sense to me. Moving on with his questions, he just has the one SVS PC 2000 subwoofer for now. It's kind of back and to the left if you're sitting on the couch. He did a subwoofer crawl. Realistically, there were only a few spots in his room where it could go, just like we talked about earlier. And along the back wall to the left of the couch is where it sounded best. The instructions say to start with the subwoofer's volume knob at the halfway point. After running Odyssey, he more or less felt like he wanted to turn the subwoofer up a bit at all times. So what should he do? Turn it up. Should he set the subwoofer's volume knob higher and then run Odyssey again? No. Just turn it up. That's why the second half of the knob exists. It's okay, man. You want more? You got more. And so he's wondering, is this an indication that he actually needs a higher output subwoofer? No, it outputs more. Turn it up. Go for it. Grab the knob. Turn it.
Lee's pretty much correct. Now, sometimes instead of turning the knob on the back of the subwoofer up even higher, you can just go into the AV receivers menu and increase the subwoofer's trim level a little bit.
Because looking at the size of his room, that sub, that PC 2000,
it should be fine. Should be fine.
Handle it. So.
And he's only left it at halfway, and we don't even know where the trim level was set by Odyssey. It might have been set to -8 for all we know.
True.
Right? With the volume knob already set halfway up.
As someone who's been disappointed with what the receiver thought I ought to get bass-wise, I totally feel him on that.
Yeah, no, this is totally common. I mean, most people, Tom included, prefers having the subwoofer output goosed a little bit.
Yeah.
I want a little bit more, because Odyssey goes for pretty darn flat. That's one of the criticisms some people had. That's why some people really appreciate that new Odyssey app that allows you to manually change the target. Which is actually another solution to this, because his receiver is new enough that it does work with that Odyssey app. So there's a few things. There's a few ways to come at this. One, you could pay the $20, get the Odyssey app, manually change the target so that the bass has a little bit of a rise to it instead of being a perfectly flat line. That's one way you could do it. You could, like Lee says, just turn up the volume dial on the back of the subwoofer. That is okay. You could manually increase the trim level of the subwoofer inside the Marantz AV receiver. Or if you haven't tried dynamic EQ already, that's the first thing to try, is having dynamic EQ turned on, because if you're like most people, you're not listening at full reference volume. You're probably listening at -10, -20, something below reference volume.
TV shows, my amp always says -25.
Sure.
Or if I'm watching something exciting, it'll say -15. If it's a live concert, maybe I get on up around -10. But
either way, below
zero.
Below full reference volume, which would be 0 on the volume dial. So
no, I've never put it on 0. That would be scary.
If that's the case, then dynamic EQ will actually increase the volume of your bass to keep everything audible. So multiple ways to come at this, but you are absolutely not wrong for going, you know what? I don't really like just having completely flat bass. I would like a little bit more. That is totally fine.
Yeah, man. If you want to add some seasoning to that, you do it.
Yeah.
Have fun. Infinite Gary, I think he asks a question every time I'm on the show. I think that's cool. Infinite Gary, here we go, man. Part A for Infinite Gary. In Gary's turntable setup, he's using a really good-looking Project Perspective belt drive deck with a Sumiko Blackbird high output moving coil cartridge. Again, that's a mouthful. He's got a Project Tube Box SE2 preamp. It's a very pretty turntable. I'll give him credit for picking that. I like it. It's transparent. The base of it is.
Yeah, it looks like it's like kind of that acrylic material or something.
Yeah. I've often joked that my two favorite colors in the world are transparent and chrome. So that's my turntable right there. I need to add that to cart too before we get done. So that's what he has. He has the Project beautiful turntable, a Sumiko Blackbird high output moving coil cartridge, and a Project Tube Box SE2 preamplifier. He's used those components with a few different amps and receivers, but at the moment he's connecting them to his Marantz SR6010 AV receiver. The Marantz has a phono input, and the manual says it is, quote, compatible with turntables equipped with a moving magnet phono cartridge. When you connect to a turntable with a low output moving coil cartridge, use a commercially available moving coil head amp or a step-up transformer, unquote. Given that he's using a high output moving coil cartridge plus the tube phono preamp, what input should he use on the Marantz? And I bet the answer is a regular line input, not the phono input.
Yeah, so there's a few things, and you sort of have to. I'm not sure if it's
that tube box is all about. It is converting. Yeah. It's applying the RIAA curve, right?
Yeah.
And so
there's a few different things going on here.
Right. So once you've boosted and applied that curve, you now have a proper line level signal.
Yeah. So first, that Sumiko Blackbird High, which is a high output moving coil cartridge, not a traditional low output moving coil cartridge. Right. It actually says, if you read through its specs, and you have to read somewhat carefully, so this isn't complete, this should have been told to you by the person you bought it from, essentially. But if you do read through, it says, because it's this high output moving coil cartridge, it basically has the same output as a standard moving magnet cartridge.
There you go.
It's a specialized high output version. It's not your
135. What were the units there? I forget.
Well, it's 47 kilohertz in impedance.
The impedance was
and then the amount of voltage that's coming out of it is equivalent to your standard moving magnet cartridge. Yeah. Now, the end result of that is that if you just took the turntable using this particular Sumiko moving or high output moving coil cartridge,
you wouldn't need anything.
You could actually connect that directly to the phono input of the Marantz. You could do that, and it would work. But the reason you're using that extra piece of equipment, that Project Tube Box SE2, is that it's first of all, it's a tube preamp, so it's coloring the sound somewhat, but hopefully in a pleasing way would be the idea.
It's pretty. It looks good.
It's pretty.
I like his turntable setup. I really do.
And it's applying it actually gives you a choice of some different curves in that. So it's more flexible, gives you a choice of some things that you might want to do. But what you actually want to do, because it gives you a whole bunch of different input impedances that you could set it to.
So and none of them exactly match.
Well, it does, because it has the 47 kilo ohm setting.
But the ohms, the 135 ohm setting, I thought I saw something that did not match. Like you could pick 100, or you could pick 100 or 220 ohms.
If it were a traditional low output moving coil. But the Sumiko specifications say, treat this like a standard moving magnet with 47 kilo ohm output. That's the trick. That's the trick. So there's a setting that you need to make on that Project Tube Box.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. What jumpers do you use?
You need to treat it like it's a standard 47 kilo ohm moving magnet cartridge. So that's one thing to be wary of. Okay. Now, after you've done that, the manual for the Project Tube Box preamplifier very clearly says, this is now, exactly like Lee said, your standard line level output connected to, say, the CD input of your amplifier, your AV receiver or your amplifier, right? Don't connect it to the phono input of your AV receiver. We've already done that stage for you inside of this Project Tube Box preamplifier. So connect it to your regular CD or auxiliary or tape or whatever, standard red and white, left-right inputs. That's where that goes. So yeah.
All right. So if his cartridge says, okay, so all he has to do is put no jumper on there at all.
There you go. Take it out of the box.
Take it out of the box and use it, and just plug it into a line and pay. Okay, we're golden then.
Yeah. What honestly, what makes this somewhat confusing is that Sumiko cartridge. Yeah. Because it is specifically a high output moving coil that they have set up to basically act like a standard moving magnet output. That's the thing to wrap your head around here. So as long as you get that, the rest is all pretty easy. You could forego the Project Tube Box preamplifier entirely. You could just plug the outputs of your turntable using this particular high output moving coil cartridge. You could just plug that into the phono input of the Marantz and forego the preamplifier. That would work.
Might be fun to see which one you like better and see if you like the sound of your tube preamp as much as you think you do.
Right.
I would be curious to see if I could tell a difference. You might tell a difference in level. You might tell a difference in everybody that likes turntables loves the word warmth.
Oh, yes.
If you like turntables and you like tube amps, warmth. is the greatest word in the English language.
Yeah, a little bit confusing. So I don't blame asking some questions about that because it's not quite your standard thing. If you're like, oh, moving coil, I know what to do with this. It's like, I got to be a little careful.
All right, so plug it into a line input, but I would say also try without the preamp.
Without the preamp at all.
In the phono input and see which one sounds.
Sure.
Tell us what the difference is. Okay, so last week, Gary asked about his tabletop speaker setup where he's using a pair of Dyne Audio 110 bookshelf speakers that are spaced only 34 inches on center apart. Tom and Rob were uncertain whether this was just for background music or if Gary is sitting near field close to the table. So Gary clarified that he uses this setup when he's playing keyboard.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. These are aimed right at his face when he's playing keyboard. The keyboard goes on its stand just in front of the table, and the speakers are on the table, and they're used for playing accompaniment. So Gary's playing along with the speakers. Is that what's going on here?
That's right.
So Gary's about 4.5 feet in front of the speakers, seated with his head in the sweet spot while he plays the keyboard. Given that info, is there a particular speaker that's similar in size to his Dyne Audio 110s that is considered exceptional? He even put that in quote. Exceptional. That might perform particularly well for this task. He'd be fine with passive or self-powered speakers. Well, he's open to a lot of things. Does that mean he's unhappy with the Dyne Audios, or just kind of wondering if there's magic unicorn?
It's Gary. Gary just likes to buy and try stuff. You know.
He likes the magic unicorn dust out there.
That's
doesn't
right.
He? Yeah.
I certainly have something in mind that I would like if this were my setup. And if I had the budget to afford it, I'd be going for some KEF LS50s. Those, they call them their mini monitors. They're available in a wide variety of finishes, so you can get a look that I'm sure will appeal to you.
They look robotic from the future. I love it.
they're cool-looking speakers.
Yeah, I really do. I like the white ones with the bronze-colored driver. Now, is that a single driver?
No, it is a concentric driver.
Okay, so there's a little tweeter in the middle.
There's a tweeter in the middle and then a woofer around there. Now, they're about an inch wider than the speakers he's using right now. And if you get because they're available both in passive and self-powered, so you have the choice. The self-powered version is about an inch deeper. The passive version is about the same depth. So they're very slightly larger than his current Dyne Audios, but that, I don't believe, would be an issue.
They're also very slightly larger than my budget.
Yeah, they're not cheap, but this is Gary. And he's like, is there something exceptional of this size?
The answer is yes, there's always something exceptional.
That would work particularly well in this setup, and I really think the KEF LS50s would. I think they'd be spectacular.
Yeah, that kind of driver where everything is coming from a single point as close as they can get it would be very appropriate in that situation.
Yeah.
Because he's in the sweet spot, same right as his head.
$1,500 a pair for the passive versions, $2,200 a pair for the self-powered versions. These are not cheap, but they are exceptional.
He said exceptional. He did not say cheap. Yeah. So if you can do exceptional, man, that's a gorgeous looking speaker. I'd love to be able to hear that. But I live in a town that doesn't have anything but a Best Buy. I'm not hearing that anytime soon.
You never know. I mean, KEF is pretty widely available, so.
You think those $1,500 KEF bookshelf speakers are going to be at the Best Buy?
If you've got a Magnolia, maybe.
In Tuscaloosa, Alabama. We do not have a Magnolia. We have a Best Buy. You can go look at the OLED that I want. They do have that. They go that far, but they're not going to have that. Anyway, so there's that's Gary. Thank you, Gary. Moving on to Bobby. Bobby M. Last week, Bobby asked about being able to use a 100-inch projection screen when his throw distance is only 9.5 feet. Furthermore, he was hoping his 2.35 to 1 content could be larger than his 16 by 9 content. I understand, but boy, that gets complicated. Yes. Our response was that he would need to move his projector farther back. Bobby wrote back to us some more details. He has exactly 139 inches from the back wall of his room to the screen, and realistically, with the projector itself being not quite 18 inches long from front to back, the farthest the lens of the projector can be from the screen is 9 feet 11 inches. As a reminder, he was planning to sit 11 feet from eyes to screen, meaning his seat would be right up against the back wall.
Yeah.
Using Epson's throw distance calculator, he'd be able to use the 100-inch screen size with the projector as far back as possible. But he'd still prefer for that 2.35 to 1 content to be larger than 16 by 9. Okay.
Yep. No, that's totally fair. I get where you're coming from.
I understand it just does complicate things. If he were to use a 92-inch 16 by 9 screen, could he keep that same height, 45 inches, and make 2.35 to 1 content wider. Now, there is a series of mathematical notes here.
Yes.
Would you like me to read?
Oh no, those are there for my reference,
okay.
so that I'd have numbers on hand.
This is where we get to the point where I say I did not know math would be involved. And I claim, look, I did just take an ibuprofen.
Well, these are mostly numbers.
Yeah.
I've done the math so that I have the numbers at hand.
Okay. Well, then let's have you explain this. I'll try to follow along and ask questions for anybody who's losing it.
Right. So I want to try and make this as simple as possible. So first of all,
which is why there's a paragraph of notes with numbers.
That's right. His room is not terribly long. All right, and he's figured out the farthest that the lens of this projector can realistically be from the screen is 9 feet 11 inches. So that's it. That's a hard number. That's as far back as this lens can be.
Jammed all the way back against the back wall, and I hope he's taking into account any cords that might stick out the back of the projector.
Yeah. So it's that's leaving basically 20 inches, all right, from the lens to the back wall, which gives you like a 2.5-inch gap for cords to stick out the back. Okay. So when you do that, if all you're using is the Epson projector, because he's talking about an Epson 5040 UB, or maybe the new one that they've introduced, the 4000, the Home Cinema 4000. Both of those have the same throw distance. Both of them have the same lens angle and all that. If you have just the projector and you put its lens 9 feet 11 inches away from the screen, the widest the image, all right? We're talking about the width of the image, not the diagonal.
The width of the 16:9 image.
Yeah.
Coming out of
just the width. I'm trying to keep this as super simple as possible. Yeah, the widest the image can be is 88 inches.
Okay.
All right. So what this projector would be doing, you've set it up as far away as you can do it in this room. You've zoomed it all the way in, so it's throwing the biggest image it possibly can. From this distance, you can make the image smaller, but you can't make it any bigger. You've zoomed it all the way in, just like zooming in the lens on a camera until you're zoomed in as far as it can go. That will be 88 inches wide and 49.5 inches tall, which is a 101-inch diagonal 16:9 image, all right?
Right.
Now, with the projector all by itself, you cannot get any wider than that.
Right.
There's no wider to go. So if you kept that same width and you made it 2.35 to 1, so it's still 88 inches wide, but now it's 2.35 to 1 instead of 16:9. Now it will be 88 inches wide, but 37 inches tall.
So it's a foot less tall when you're watching 2.35 to 1 versus 16:9.
Right. So if you just remember that the width stays constant in this scenario. All you have is the projector. It's as far back as it can be. It's zoomed in as much as it can be. 88 inches wide is the maximum that you can do. All right. Now, if you're sitting where you've said you want to sit, which is 11 feet from eyes to screen, at this point you have a 36.5 degree field of view, which is nice.
It's nice. I'd like a little more for a projected image.
It's maybe a little bit on the small side, all right? But that's what you could do. 88 inches wide is the maximum. That means 2.35 to 1 content would be 37 inches tall, all right? And if you were to then use that height, that 37-inch height, as your height for 16:9 content as well, right? You zoom the projector out, the image gets smaller, it stays 37 inches high, but now it's not as wide. That would result in a 75-inch diagonal screen. So what you'd be talking about is a 75-inch diagonal 16:9 image and a 2.35 to 1 image that's 88 inches wide, which is about 95 inches diagonal for 2.35 to 1, all right? So none of that is exactly what he was after. He basically wanted 88 inches or 87 inches wide for 16:9.
And then even wider.
And then even wider. Well,
same height. Even wider.
He was talking about a 92-inch 16:9 screen, all right? So that's 80 inches wide and 45 inches tall. Then he's like, could I keep it 45 inches tall and make it even wider for 2.35 to 1? Well, if you did that, to be 45 inches tall, it would have to be 106 inches wide for 2.35 to 1. Now, what did we say the maximum width was? 88.
88.
You can't make it
coming straight out of the projector.
Coming straight out of the projector. So coming straight out of the projector, you can't do what you said you wanted to do, which is to have a 92-inch diagonal 16 by 9 image, then keep that same height, which is 45 inches, and make it wider for 2.35 to 1. The widest you can get is 88, and you're trying to get to 106. Can't be done with the projector all by itself. Now,
but there's an answer.
There is something you could do, which is to add an external anamorphic lens in front of the projector. This is a minimum $1,500 cost for a good anamorphic lens. Now,
one that doesn't color the image or, have any.
That's right. Alter the shape, make it dimmer, change the geometry, do anything nasty to the picture.
You really wouldn't want to skimp on an anamorphic lens.
Now, there are people who they've bought their own prisms. They've made their own anamorphic lens for far less than $1,500. Okay. It can be done.
I mean, people make telescopes.
Sure. The results are a little bit hit and miss, and man, oh man, do you have to be precise. So it's a tricky thing to do it yourself. It can be done though for less. But if you're like, this is all I want to do, is have a 92-inch 16 by 9 screen. I want to sit 11 feet away from it, and I want to have that same height but make the image wider. The only way you can do it in your scenario, since you cannot move the projector any farther back, is to put an anamorphic lens in front of the projector.
So do you literally buy a contraption that you attach to your projector and some sort of, steampunk-looking thing in the
it's just an anamorphic lens that you mount to the ceiling in front of your projector. Okay. And that lens sits in the light path between the projector's lens and the screen. You've just inserted a lens.
Just to get a sense of this sort of price range for people that don't know much about this stuff, this $1,500 is a stationary lens that you'd have to go and move it with your hand.
Well,
and push it in front of the projector's lens.
You can actually just leave it there all the time.
Okay.
It'll work. When you're playing 2.35 to 1 content, the projector has a mode where it'll just stretch everything vertically. Okay. Everybody gets tall and skinny, and then the lens stretches them widthwise to make them wider. And then when you're watching 16 by 9 content, it actually puts black bars on the left and right and squishes everything so that when the lens stretches it, it looks correct.
I got you, but that's not the ideal picture quality coming out of your projector for 16 by 9.
It's a pretty decent way to do this, which saves you the hassle of having to get a motorized, movable anamorphic lens, which you're looking at $3,500 and up. Unless you make your own. People have made their own. You can. But my point is, this is a not easy and pretty expensive venture. And when your goal is to have a reasonably affordable projector, adding an extra $1,500 to $3,500 on top of that just for a lens seems like it's different. If you're buying a $25,000 projector, you know, then that seems like a reasonable percentage. But we're talking about potentially more than doubling the cost of the projector itself just to get this lens. So there's an easier solution to this. Which is to move your seat closer to the screen.
There you go.
Which I would advise anyway, because I don't like the idea of having your seat right up against the back wall. I would far prefer for you to have... Now, he's talking about this being a dedicated theater room. It's not being used
I
for
wouldn't
other
want it all the way
purposes.
against the wall either.
Yeah, so... Okay, you had in mind an 11-foot viewing distance. I'm going to suggest to you a 9-foot viewing distance, right? I've moved your seat 2 feet closer. Now you have 2 feet of space behind your seat, which is nicer acoustically. You'd have room to put some absorption back there. I'd still stick with 5.2.4 because he was talking about an Atmos setup before. I still wouldn't bother putting surround back speakers behind you because you only have
still too close,
only 2 feet of space behind. But it's nicer to have that 2 feet of space behind you. And now you're 9 feet from eyes to screen. Now, now you stick with that 75-inch diagonal 16 by 9 image, the one that's 37 inches tall. Right? From 9 feet away, that's giving you like a 34, 35 degree field of view. Really nice for 16 by 9. And then you can expand it to 87, 88 inches. You can do that because the projector can do that. And now you have a nice, what did we end up with there? I forgot it's 43.5 degree field of view.
Right. So are you suggesting he zoom the projector for
Yeah, what I'm suggesting is you sit closer. You sit 2 feet closer.
Yeah.
So now you're 9 feet from eyes to screen.
Hmm.
When you're watching 16 by 9, so the projector's still as far back as it can be. That hasn't changed. Projector's still as far back as it can be. But when you're watching 16 by 9, you now zoom out. You now actually make the image smaller.
I got you.
You make the image 37 inches tall. All right?
Now, can this projector, like a car seat that memorizes positions, can it do that? And memorize 2 settings?
It has lens memory, so it will remember your zoom setting, your lens shift setting, your focus setting, which is all motorized.
Oh, dude, that's the answer.
It's a lot cheaper than buying the lens.
Look how much you taught us to show us why that's the answer. That's the answer.
It's a lot less hassle. Yeah. So, I mean, he was asking, can he do the whole lens zooming thing? Mm-hmm. But starting with the image already as wide as it can possibly be. And the answer is no, there's nowhere wider to go.
No, geometry. Stop.
That's the widest that you can get, right?
I got it. So scooch closer, and when you watch
2 feet
16 by 9, zoom out to make it smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make the image smaller.
And then maximize the 2.35 to 1 by zooming in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then the projector can memorize those 2 different zoom settings.
That's right.
Oh man, yeah.
So you're still buying a 2.35 to 1 screen. All right. You're just buying one that's 87 or 88 inches wide. Mm-hmm. Right. So you buy a 2.35 to 1 screen that's, let's call it 87 inches wide, 37 inches tall. Right.
Yeah.
When you're watching 2.35 to 1 content, you've zoomed the projector in as far as it can go. The projector's as far back in the room as it can be. You are now 2 feet closer to the screen, and you've zoomed it in as much as it can be. It's filled the entire 87-inch width of that screen. When you watch 16 by 9, you zoom the projector out. The image gets smaller. Now the full height is 37 inches, but it's only 65 and a half inches wide, which is a 16 by 9 aspect ratio now. And now you have the smaller image, same height, not as wide for 16 by 9. And you use the lens memories in that projector.
Rob, you've done a wonderful thing. You took me on a mathematical journey. And now I'm thinking about something in a way I haven't thought about it before. And that's spectacular. I don't know how you feel, Bobby, but he took me there and brought me back, and now I understand it.
And like I say, if you're like, I don't care what Rob says, I'm not sitting any closer. I am sitting at 11 feet, and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Then the only way to do what you want to do is to put an external lens in front of that projector. It can still be done. I'm saying it can still be done, but that's the only way to do it. So
that's Rob saying, you can disagree with me, but it'd be dumb.
But it'll cost you. It'll cost you. But who knows, right? I mean, that's fine.
I love that idea. I've never even thought of it that way, because you think that, I'm shrinking my 16 by 9, but not really. Just think of that as a starting point, and you're expanding your 235.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. There you go, Bobby. That's a pretty good answer. Moving on to Russell C. Russell has had a Yamaha Avantage. Is it a Vintage or Avantage?
I don't know. Avantage, that's what I've heard.
Avantage. RXA 1020BL for 3 years. So he's had this Avantage for 3 years until the main board failed. He had bought it at Best Buy and gotten the extended warranty, though. So he ended up with a Best Buy gift card to use for a replacement receiver. Cool. Nice. Having been an AVRant listener for a, quote, long time, unquote, he decided to try out something from Denon Marantz. Makes sense if you've been listening to this podcast. And now owns a Denon AVR X4300H. But then he listened to the, quote, train wreck episode where it was discussed regarding the not yet released Denon AVR X4400H and Marantz SR6012. And he's having a little buyer's remorse. Now he knows there might be something better in the world. He is still within the return period, so he's not stuck yet. But do we think it's worth going receiverless until the new models release, or is his X4300 good enough? Ooh, receiverless. That hurts to even say. And aside from all that, is there a better choice available from Best Buy that he should return the X4300H for anyway? So I guess my first question is, what's the big upgrade between the 4300 and the 4400 that Denon receiver?
Exactly. So what are the feature differences? Now, there's one that I care about, which is the ability to pass a Dolby Vision signal through the AV receiver.
Okay, yeah.
Denon has made it explicit that the X4400H will do that. Not out of the box. They said it's going to require a firmware update in the spring, something like that, or fall. I don't know. They made it explicit the X4400H is going to have a firmware update that gives it Dolby Vision pass-through.
Dolby Vision pass-through, sure.
It has not been explicitly said that the X4300H, the one he's already got, will get that same ability. Marantz, on their UK website, has said that the SR6011, which is the sister model to the Denon 4300H, will get Dolby Vision pass-through via a firmware update. But that's so far the only Marantz website. It's only the UK version that has specifically mentioned that year's model number. So the expectation is that your X4300H, the ones you already have in hand right now, the expectation is that it will get the ability to pass Dolby Vision through. That's what we expect. Is it possible Denon will make a liar out of me? It is possible.
Sure.
Until they explicitly say that it's happening, I can't be certain, but the strong expectation is that it will happen. So
one thing we don't know is whether Russell has a TV that can do Dolby Vision.
Right. That might all be moot.
Like if he doesn't have one and he doesn't plan to get one anytime real soon, then it's moot.
But that's kind of the one feature difference that I care about, because we explicitly know the 4400H is for sure getting Dolby Vision pass-through. We expect the 4300 will, but we can't say with 100% certainty just yet. So that's number one. Number two, the 4400H will have Oro 3D capability out of the box.
Okay.
The 4300H that you already have, it can do Oro 3D, but you have to pay $200 to get it.
Why do we even want it?
Well, you probably don't.
There you go.
But the point is, if you really, really do, you can get it on the 4300H. You just have to pay extra for it. Right? So that's one other feature. The last feature difference, the 4400H gets DTS's newest little up-mixing processing thingy that they are calling DTS Virtual X. Now, what is that?
I don't know. Tell me, Rob.
Like the virtual name implies, says, let's say you have 5.1 speakers, right? Physically, that's what you got. 5 speakers on a sub. But you want to listen to a DTS X soundtrack.
Okay.
That has the overhead sounds, right? Yep. And surround backs behind you. Well, DTS Virtual X will try to use some phase shifting, frequency response altering trickery to make you think that maybe you have speakers above you. You don't. They are virtual speakers. Yeah. But that's what DTS Virtual X is. It's, you know, the same thing a sound bar does where you only have a sound bar up front, but it tries to trick you into thinking you have surround speakers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Virtual surround speakers.
Right.
That's what Virtual X is, but for the overhead sounds. All right.
It's like getting a phantom center channel a little bit.
It's even less than that.
It's less than that because you're not there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're not in the middle.
How much do we care about that? Well, if you have physical speakers overhead, not at all, because you're just going to use DTS-X, right?
Yeah. I don't care.
So my honest answer is, assuming that Dolby Vision pass-through update does happen, we expect it will, there's a chance we'll be wrong. But if it does, then there's really nothing about the X4400H that I would say is important to get over the X4300H.
Especially if he doesn't have a TV
that can do Dolby Vision, then you definitely don't care. Right. So I say you're pretty darn safe with that 4300H. Is there something else that you should buy? Well, what if you want Dolby Vision pass-through right this second? You got to have it right now.
Yeah, right now.
Well, then you kind of have to buy an Onkyo or a Pioneer, one of their newest models, because they're the only ones who are doing it out of the box. But other than that, that's putting a heck of a lot of importance on Dolby Vision.
Right.
So
that's what it boils down to. Do you have a Dolby Vision capable television, Russell?
I think the X4300H is a really good choice. That's the bottom line.
There you go. There's just not a lot of reason to worry about it. But that's a common emotion, if you will, of people that ask questions. And it does keep changing. Am I missing something? Am I missing something better that I would notice? It's a gnawing fear when you've spent money on good stuff and you're like, but But what if?
Well, I mean, I just had the thing where I bought a couple of years ago a Denon X5200W, and the very next year wound up replacing it with a Marantz SR7010 for the simple reason that the X5200W could do Atmos, but it never got a DTS-X update. All right. Now, the 7010 that I own now, it can do DTS-X, it can do Atmos, but you know what it can't do and will never do? Dolby Vision pass-through.
Oh.
It's not getting that update ever. So, you know, being afraid that you're missing out on one feature that might be the fly in the ointment, totally understandable.
Yeah.
Because I've been through the same stupid thing.
If you don't have unlimited money and you don't want to buy new stuff all the time.
These are expensive receivers, not cheap stuff.
It's always a fear. All right, Russell. Yeah. Hopefully that helps guide you in the differences. Here we go with Tate. Tate L. Tate appreciated our explanation of the feature differences between the higher-end Denon and Marantz receiver models. And now he's hoping we can provide a similar breakdown of the differences between Odyssey 2 EQ, Multi-Q, Multi-Q XT, and Multi-Q XT32. Woo! And again, I kind of went and looked to see if I can keep up with this discussion, and it made my head hurt on this day when I have gut problems. Yeah. Yeah. So is there an easy way to summarize the differences? It comes down to more seating positions and more precision of the frequencies involved.
Yeah, it comes down to more measurement positions. And you could call it finer granularity to the filters. I.e. having more filters as you go up in this lineup. That's more or less all that's going on here. So the really simple way, you don't want Odyssey 2 EQ. Let me just say that.
That's the bottom of the line.
That one does not equalize the subwoofer output at all.
Right.
Really all it's half decent for is setting your distances, your trim levels, and that's about it. I would actually use it as an automatic setup to set my distances and trim levels, and then I would turn it off. Because as far as what it does in the way of equalization, I think it's doing more harm than good. It doesn't have a lot of filter bands. Those filter bands only exist above the bass. It's kind of useless.
Yeah.
I don't like 2EQ. Multi-EQ is where Odyssey started. Multi-EQ makes a fair amount of sense. It gives you subwoofer equalization. It sets your distances and trim levels. It allows you to measure in 6 different positions to get fairly good spatial averaging. Oh yeah, 2EQ allows you to measure in 3 positions only. Multi-EQ allows you to measure in 6. It's pretty okay. The one knock against it is that it still doesn't have a ton of filters in that mid-range and treble, and it doesn't let you turn that off. So there is the opportunity for it, again, to do more harm than good in the mid-range and treble.
Okay.
Because how much you really want to equalize that when the granularity of those filters isn't all that high.
Yeah.
It's kind of
when you say filters, you're talking about something kind of like the bands on an EQ, right?
Yeah. Now, these are a little bit more
of them and how precise the frequencies are that they affect.
Yeah, these are a little more sophisticated. Odyssey uses what they call FIR filters, finite impulse response filters, which basically just means you can have them active for certain periods of time. You can control the period of time during which that filter is active. So you can say, I only want you to cut this frequency by this many decibels for the first 7 milliseconds, then turn off.
Okay.
Right? It can do that with a finite impulse response.
That is a precise measurement of a reflection in the room, I guess.
That's right. Or you can say, I want you to boost this frequency, but not for the first 5 milliseconds, but for the 10 milliseconds after that.
Because your decay is going away too fast.
That's your decay, exactly. So that's how it filters the direct response and the reflected response. You can say, boost or cut this given frequency and however many frequencies adjacent to it. Boost or cut it by this many decibels for this period of time. That's what Odyssey is doing at its most basic explanation of what it's doing. So Multi-Q XT is where things pick up. That gives you lots of filters in the bass. It gives you quite a few filters in the mid-range and treble. You can measure in 8 different positions to get good spatial averaging. Multi-Q XT is pretty darn good. I would recommend using it if you have it.
It sounds like as you step up in this line, it'd be really good for complex rooms, problem rooms.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you enough granularity. It gives you enough filters to fine tune the response, not just the initial response, but also the timing.
Yeah,
So
that's
all those
fascinating.
reflections.
Yeah, the timing thing is particularly fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. So it's pretty powerful stuff, but you need a lot of filters to do it really accurately. And you need to measure in a lot of locations so that you aren't boosting stuff so that, well, for this one location it helps, but for this other location it hurts. You don't really want to do that. You want to sort of split the difference.
But like in my living room, we sit very wide.
Yeah.
Like off to the left and right very far, because that's just how it has to be to fit chairs in there.
So Multi-Q XT32, it just takes that to an even higher level, even more filters, and still 8 measurement positions. Then Multi-Q XT32 has the option to add another feature, which is separate from Multi-Q, that is called Sub-EQ, HT. That allows you to independently measure 2 subwoofers, whereas all the other ones, 1 subwoofer only. So that's specifically Sub-EQ HT, 2 subwoofers independently. So that's sort of the Odyssey lineup. You're just getting more and more filters, better and better spatial averaging, more and more granular control over what the filters are doing.
Yeah, gotcha. That makes sense. And now Tate also asked, beyond Odyssey, what about the room correction systems offered by other brands? How do they compare? I mean, they must be, they have the same sort of categories of things they're doing.
Yeah.
With timings and filters and precision.
A wide smattering out there, and I'm not going to go into detail on every single one of them. I'm going to point you over to Audioholics in their room acoustics section. They've done interviews with several, either the lead engineer or the CEO of the company or whomever for several of the different room correction programs, and they ask detailed questions. So that's a fantastic resource. So if you want to dig more into Dirac, Odyssey that we just talked about, Anthem's automatic room correction. All right. But he, in his email, sort of mentioned Pioneer and Yamaha, which are, the more common ones. And there's Onkyo as well with their Accu EQ system. So remember I was saying how Odyssey uses these FIR filters, these finite impulse response filters. You can choose the amount of time over which they're active. So not the opposite, but the alternative to that is something called an IIR filter, an infinite impulse response, meaning it's active all the time. Right? Okay. This filter is happening at all times. That's where Yamaha's YPAO, Yamaha Parametric Acoustic Optimization.
YPAO.
That's where that started. It started with an infinite impulse response filter, a parametric filter. Yep. The parameter filter lets you choose the frequency at which it's centered, how many frequencies to the left and right of that frequency you want to affect, and sort of like how the slope of those frequencies to the left and right.
I have that. I've manually tweaked the one on my Yamaha receiver. I have a simpler version of that, but yeah, it has all that. There's a Q setting.
Yep, that's the width.
And then it is frustrating because you make an adjustment to one frequency, it affects the frequencies next to it that you've already set. And so when I did the automatic setting, and then I went in and did some manual adjustments, I wanted more bass, and I also, it compensated for an open foyer on one side by using more frequencies. There was one unused frequency on the left, and so I kind of schmoed it around and made them match pretty close. I sort of took my own mental average, and then I was able to free up a frequency to boost my bass.
Okay. Well, basic YPOW, that's what it's working with. That's what Anthem room correction is working with. It's working with an infinite impulse response, parametric filter. That's what the mini DSP, just your standard mini DSP, is working with. Infinite impulse response, parametric filters. Now, Yamaha has more recently, and this is still years ago, so it's been around for a while, they've added something called reflective sound control, RSC. And they've also added a thing called multi-point measurement. Well, guess what those are? Those are more measurement locations, and reflected sound control is adding a FIR filter, a finite impulse response filter, to try and affect the reflected sound rather than direct sound. So that means they've gotten a little bit more similar to what Odyssey is doing, but they still have their own proprietary target curve, their desired response that they're aiming for. Those things are still separate. But, they've kind of gotten a little bit more similar. Pioneer MCACC, multi-channel acoustic correction. MCACC.
MCACC. That's a mouthful.
Now, they were actually one of the very first room correction programs. And they started with kind of a basic graphic EQ, like your old school graphic EQ, and then they updated that to sort of be include phase response. So now they're up to a thing called MCACC Pro, which is pretty darn powerful. And they're using fur filters, and they're using multi-point measurement, and they're using 2 independent subwoofer measurements. So again, they have a proprietary target, a proprietary, desired outcome that they're going for. But they've kind of gotten a little bit similar. And then there's something like Dirac. Dirac is almost like Odyssey taken sort of to the next level. In fact, it requires so much processing power. The processing can't be done inside of any current AV receivers themselves. You have to do it on a laptop or send the calculations off to their cloud server to crunch the numbers. And they're using a mix. They're using a mix of IIR filters and FIR filters. And they're doing some really complicated algorithms to get you like really specific, teeny tiny little chunks.
For the consumer, is there a way to know when you really need to move up to the more sophisticated versions? Is there any way to know?
It's almost a philosophical question.
Yeah. Just buy what you can afford and tweak it as best you can is really what it comes down to.
It's tricky. It's almost a philosophical question because, okay, let's take the theoretical idea, right? You have a signal. The signal says, play these notes this loud for this long. It's a set of instructions. You get a speaker and an amplifier, and you put it in an anechoic chamber, right? There's no room reflections going on. And that speaker and amplifier plays that signal completely accurately, all right? You stick a microphone in that anechoic chamber, and the signal said, play these notes this loud for this long, and that's exactly what that speaker does, all right? So far, we're thinking, hey, we're doing pretty good here, right? Now, you take that speaker. You know this speaker is very, very accurate. It's very, very faithful to the original signal. And you put it in a regular room, a room that produces reflections. Right. And now you go and measure at your seat and all the seats in the room. And every single seat gives you a different result, and none of them are the original signal.
Right.
Now, that's reality. That's what's going on. Now, philosophically, what do we say?
Well, there you've got a speaker that you know it output the right sound.
Yeah.
But your room messed it up.
Yeah.
Okay, so do I now mess up the sound in a different way to compensate for the room messing up the sound?
Yeah, see, this is the trick.
The more you're getting away from the actual accurate sound coming out of the speaker. Well, that's why you guys talk so much about room correction.
Yeah.
Fix the room first before you fix the sound you're sending to the speakers.
Yeah.
And by the way, let me just say, I've got a wife who is ill worse than me, and I'm going to bow out after another question here.
That sounds fine, but yeah,
I'm getting a text while I'm doing this.
But let's just imagine that the signal that was originally recorded, they took a person and they put them in a padded room, so there's no reflections, and they stuck the
cell, if you will.
They stuck the microphone right up to their mouth, right? So you're getting almost 100% direct sound and no reflected sound in the original recording, right? Now that sound plays out of this speaker that in the anechoic chamber we know was completely faithful to that original signal. And now we take that speaker and we put it in a real room. What have we effectively done? We've effectively taken that original voice and put it into your room.
Right.
And even though the response that reaches your ear at your seat, because of all your room reflections, is different from the original signal, it's the same as essentially taking that original person and putting them in your room, right? That is the bring the instruments, bring the people into my room philosophy. Right. Close mic'd. The original recording has no ambience, no reflections in it.
Yeah.
The speaker's really accurate, and I don't do any room correction because I want to bring the original performance into my room.
As opposed to putting me into the room where it was recorded.
Exactly, as opposed to what I like to say, transporting me
right
out of my room into the venue. That's a different philosophy.
It is. But it's two very interesting and fun things that can be done. Do I want to be carried off to the concert? Or do I want the guys to sit in my room playing?
That's right. And for movies,
I tend to want to go to the.
Yeah, see, for movies, I want to be transported. I don't want to be sitting in my dinky little home theater. I want to be transported to, the alien world that we're on, the spaceship we're in, the exotic locale we just went to. If we're traveling the world with James Bond, I don't want to be in my little room the whole time. I want to be wherever I'm seeing on screen, right? I want to be transported. That means I need the sound that reaches my ear despite what my room is doing to it,
to
be
sound
accurate
like what
to
the engineers heard when
That's
they mixed
right.
it. Yeah,
That's right. See, so it's a difference in philosophy, and there's arguments both ways.
That's why I like some correct for the obvious problems in the room. Correct them with
Yeah, I mean, if you have a certain
software.
frequency that's just ringing and ringing and ringing, well, it was never like that's just bad.
Yeah, that's just a bad room.
So let's
bad
fix
room.
that.
Fix that. But yeah, I don't know that it makes sense to try to turn your room into something it's not, and to alter the signal that much. So yeah, there's a balance, I guess you could say.
There is a balance, and that's why I like to say all of these room correction programs I consider the cherry on top. And I'm actually kind of fine with you not using them at all.
Right.
Right? If you have made it so that your room is not abhorrent, so that it's not ringing certain sounds, so that certain sounds aren't way louder or way quieter than they ought to be, so you don't really need to correct for the room.
It feels to me like folks who are more into pure stereo, people who consider themselves audiophiles, are more likely to be the people that want the group playing in the room with them.
In the room with them, yeah. In which case, don't do a lot of equalization. Only do enough to correct gross errors.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's where they want the purity of the expensive speakers they bought to play the sound exactly so that the people are brought in there. And that you hear people talk about how great the sound stage is on stereo speakers if they do that, and those people are treating their rooms and stuff. But yeah, for movies, take me to the place where the Transformers are battling. They can't fit in my room.
That's right.
So it doesn't make sense, and your brain doesn't absorb it. I got you. Well, man, is it okay if I
absolutely
pop out at this point?
You know what? I'll
just abandon you, but we both have health issues, and I'm sorry I've been yawning at you a couple of times.
Not at all, Matt. Lee, thank you so much for filling in. I mean, if it had only been me for this long, it would have been weird. So
yeah, that's okay. Call me anytime. I do try, and this was just a weird thing. Last night in the middle of the night, it started to hit me, and prior to that, it started to hit my wife. And I'm feeling better, so I'm glad I didn't puke on the mic.
Yes.
It worked out okay. But call me anytime. I love this, and I like you guys, and this is always fun. So
thanks so much, Lee. Lee, just before you go, where can folks reach you if they want to?
They can always send me a message on Twitter at Lee Overtweet, and some folks have found me on Instagram, Lee Overgram.
There you go.
Either one of those is fine. So that'll be fine. Anyway, so I'm gonna head on out.
Alrighty. Take care. Take care of your wife. I hope you both feel better.
All right. Thanks a lot. We'll see you.
You got it.
Bye-bye.
So I'll carry on solo here for a little bit so that we can get through a few more questions. So Byron asks, we said that some of the new receiver models mentioned by Denon and Marantz at their European launch event will support 13 channels. Do any of them support the option to use some of those channels as front wides in something like, say, a 9.2.4 Atmos configuration? So, Byron, we don't know. We don't know for sure. According to the information that Steve Withers got over at AV Forums in the UK, he said what he was told is that you do have the option of 9.2.4 or 7.2.6. He mentioned that. However, he also got some incorrect information saying that models like the X6400H would be able to process 13 channels, and that turned out to be incorrect. So these ones that mention being able to process 13 channels, they haven't been officially announced yet. They are definitely not coming out before 2018. These are supposed to be the new flagships to replace the X7200W and the Marantz AV8802A Pre-Pro. So these are going to be like the new flagships. You almost have to take it as a bit of rumor right now. So truthfully, we don't know for sure. I hope so. I hope it's possible to do 9.2.4. You could do the kind of crazy thing of setting it up as 9.2.4 and then adding 2 more AV receivers that have Dolby Pro logic to derive a top middle channel out of that last 0.4 to create your own 9.2.6. I wouldn't mind being able to do that. That would be kind of fun. But yeah, we're not certain. We're not even certain exactly when these are going to come out. If they're going to come out, if that whole thing about 13 channel processing is 100% confirmed and true, it's just, you have to sort of treat it as rumor right now. So it's uncertain. I'm afraid I can't be any more solid than that. John S. John asks, with the recent announcements of the Optima UHD 60 and the Epson Home Cinema 4000, it appears as though 4K projectors with HDR support are already getting to sub $2,000 price points, which is far sooner than John was expecting for that to happen. That said, what are we quote unquote giving up in order to reach these low price points so quickly? Sure, these projectors can accept and display a 4K signal with HDR10, but are they under $2,000 because they kind of aren't great in some other ways? Or are we really just lucky as consumers to see these prices fall so quickly? So in the case of, let's say, the Epson Home Cinema 4000, it's actually really, really similar to a projector that already exists, which is the Pro Cinema 4040. Now, that projector has been out ever since the 5040 UB and Pro Cinema 6040 UB came out. There, at the same time, there was a Pro Cinema 4040. It kind of got overlooked because it doesn't have as high contrast, it doesn't have as deep black levels, it isn't quite as bright, and the price difference between the 5040 UB and the 4040 UB was so negligible that people were like, well, why wouldn't I just get the 5040 UB that has the deeper black levels, the higher contrast, and the brighter peak light output? So the 4000, the Epson Home Cinema 4000, is really, really similar to the 4040, the Pro Cinema 4040, just at a lower price point. It's suggested retail price of $2,200, like you say. It'll probably retail for even less than that pretty darn quickly, get to under $2,000. But yeah, that's essentially what you are, quote unquote, giving up, is the deepest black level, the higher contrast, a little bit of brightness there. It's a little bit lower light output lamp, and not as aggressive a dynamic iris, and not as refined contrast in the LCD panels that are being used there. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but then again, you're saving, at a minimum $500 versus the 5040 UB. The UHD 60, that's one that retails for $2,000 right away. Now, it's got its sort of sister model, you could call it the Optima UHD 65. And the 65 at $2,500 gets a little bit more attention because the UHD 65 has the 6-time speed color wheel. It's got a color wheel that goes red, green, blue, red, green, blue. It has 2 red segments, 2 blue segments, 2 green segments in the color wheel. Whereas the UHD 60 has red, green, blue, yellow, white. They usually call that a 5-time speed color wheel. So the idea is that you can get a little bit more brightness out of a less bright lamp when you have that sort of white segment, but you don't get quite as accurate color. The contrast isn't quite as high. The black level isn't quite as deep. So it's really similar things. You're getting that little bit deeper black level, that little bit higher contrast, that little bit brighter image from the slightly more expensive projectors. But if you're projecting onto a smaller screen, or you don't have a completely pitch black room where you're really going to notice that deepest black level and that highest contrast, there's a strong argument for saving the money. So yeah, it's not like we're getting peak performance at sub $2,000 prices. They are having to skimp a little bit here and there, particularly on a slightly lower brightness lamp, not quite as high contrast panels. That's more or less what's going on there. Justin C. A while back, Justin wrote to us because he had noticed that Odyssey was applying quite a large boost in the very high trebles. So this is like 15 to 20 kilohertz of his Sierra 2 front speakers. So I mentioned that the Sierra 2 have very narrow vertical dispersion. So it was my suspicion that the Odyssey microphone was quite possibly a little bit above or a little bit below the level of the tweeters from the speakers when the measurements were being taken, and therefore it's seeing some high frequency roll off, and as a result it's boosting the EQ of those very high frequencies to try and compensate. That was my suspicion. So Justin decided to measure the frequency response of the Sierra 2 speakers separately. So not using the Odyssey microphone and looking at what it did, he's going to measure it separately. He put his Denon X42 100W receiver into pure direct mode so that nothing of the test signal was being impacted. He physically unplugged all but one speaker, and then he used a Dayton IMM6 calibrated microphone. He plugged that into his iPhone to take some measurements of some test tones and some sweeps. And he had this microphone near field, so very close to the speaker, so it should be getting quite a direct result. So when he examined the graphs, the sweep showed, so this is, he's playing a frequency sweep, showed the Sierra 2 speaker playing really quite flat up to roughly 18 kilohertz. Then it started to roll off, and it was minus 3 decibels at about 18.8 kilohertz, almost 19 kilohertz. And so that seems to line up pretty good. I mean, that's a pretty clear indication. You got pretty good extension. I mean, okay, in his particular measurement, it wasn't flat all the way up to 20 kilohertz, but our ability to hear that high is pretty questionable. And he got a result that essentially went up to 19 kilohertz, pretty darn flat. But then he tried playing white noise, and the graph he got from that was flat up to about 16 kilohertz, and then it dropped off like a brick wall. So like 16 and a half kilohertz, it's like way, way quieter. It's just completely shut off there. So he's like, what is going on here? Basically, do the Sierra 2 have good extension up to 20 kilohertz or don't they? And do these measurements that he took himself explain why Odyssey was boosting those very high frequencies as much as they were, according to the graphs that were generated by Odyssey? So I don't know for sure, but my suspicion is that whatever white noise test signal was being played, it's the test signal that didn't contain really any information above 16 and a half kilohertz. I mean, it just drops off like a rock. And we have here this sweep that played up to 20 kilohertz that clearly shows response from the speaker, from the Sierra 2 speaker, going above 16 kilohertz, really clearly. So I can only suspect that the white noise test signal itself was a truncated signal, that it just didn't contain information above 16 kilohertz. That's really the only thing I can say there. As for why are you getting this slight roll off even in the sweep? Okay, it's not playing flat all the way up to 20 kilohertz. So if you look at Ascend's own measurements from their website, and you look at their vertical dispersion listening window, we can see that even at just 10 degrees vertically off center from that tweeter, we're starting to see kind of a similar roll off to what Justin saw with his own measurements. And only 10 degrees vertically above or below the level of the tweeter, we're starting to see, even in Ascend zone measurements, a little bit of a high frequency roll off. Extending pretty darn flat up to essentially 19 kilohertz means pretty darn flat response. There are other variables at play here. The microphone says that it is flat plus or minus 0.5 decibels up to 20 kilohertz, but is it possible that there's some very slight roll off in the microphone itself? That's possible. Is it possible that you were holding it by hand, and you got to remember, up at 20 kilohertz, the wavelength is less than a half an inch. So if you move microscopically, that can affect the reading that the microphone gets. Is it possible that the microphone was not perfectly in line with the tweeter, but was angled slightly above or slightly below? 10 degrees when you're really, really close, physically close to the tweeter, is hardly anything at all. There's all kinds of variables that could explain why you're seeing a very slight roll-off in the highest of the high treble. Essentially, I'm saying these speakers have good extension. They clearly extend above 16 kilohertz. This white noise generated graph, to me, that says the white noise, the test signal, was to blame. These clearly extend quite high. Now, again, why were we getting so much boost from Odyssey? If they had this flat response that you measured up to, let's be conservative, at least 18 kilohertz, and we're seeing this much boost happening when Odyssey did it, I still think that it was off axis. Again, because if you look at Ascend zone measurements, you get 15 degrees off axis. There's a pretty substantial roll off in the highest frequencies above 16 kilohertz. So to me, this all actually does line up pretty darn well. The speakers do have good extension, but only when you're really on axis. How much do we care about those frequencies above 16 kilohertz? Our ability to hear them is pretty darn poor. So I don't want someone to be too concerned that they're seeing some very high frequency roll off. And definitely that white noise test signal seems to be an anomaly that I think was the test signal itself. All right, so I think I will wrap up with Ian E for tonight. So Ian, First up, Ian says that he appreciates our advice regarding his outdoor theater plans from last week. We wondered how far away people were really going to be sitting in his backyard. The idea being that maybe the people could just sit closer and then he wouldn't need this really enormous screen. He was thinking maybe a screen that's actually 16 feet wide and 9 feet tall, which is like 215 inches diagonal. Starts getting really, really large. So we're like, could people just sit closer? So he says, just due to the way that the lawn and the concrete and everything is laid out, the closest people could sit would be 10 feet. And then it's more likely that he'd have people sitting 15 to 30 feet away. He says a gathering of as many as 15 to 25 people is pretty common for him. And we were also a little bit worried about the neighbors being bothered by having to play things too loud. He's like, well, he invites his neighbors over. So that's a really good plan, Ian. That's exactly the way to come at this. But he's like, yeah, there could be people, 15, 20, 30 feet away. So he was looking at Carl's Place as a place to get a DIY outdoor screen. They offer standard sizes that are 12 feet wide, and then the next standard size is 16 feet wide. So he considered ordering a custom size that would be 13 feet wide. And he had a pretty simple reason for that, which is that if it's 13 feet wide, it'll be less than 8 feet tall, such that if you built a frame to hold the screen that is 8 feet tall, the 13-foot widescreen would fit perfectly inside of an 8-foot tall frame. So the screen itself wouldn't quite be 8 feet tall, but the frame would be 8 feet. And that means he could have a very versatile screen that could actually be used indoors as well. In most normal rooms with an 8-foot ceiling height, he'd be able to use this screen that's 13 feet wide, indoors, outdoors, very versatile. Whereas the one that's 16 feet wide, the standard one that's 16 feet wide and 9 feet tall, well, it'd be too tall for most rooms that have the standard 8-foot ceiling height. So that said, when you go to order the custom size, they basically charge you the price of the next largest standard size, which is pretty standard practice. That's what most places do when you order a custom screen size. So since he'd be paying the same price as he would for the 16-foot width screen now, he's like, I could still go for the bigger screen. And he's like, even if it turns out that filling the whole screen that's 16 feet wide and 9 feet tall ends up with an image that's too big or too dim, he could just move the projector closer. He wouldn't totally fill the screen. He'd have blank space around the projected image. But, he'd have the option of this gigantic screen if he really wanted it. What do we think of that idea? So, unfortunately, you're only getting one man's opinion right now, Ian. You're only getting my opinion. But I still don't think you should get a screen that's larger than 200 inches diagonal. It starts to be a real challenge for any of the projectors that you're talking about. I actually really like your idea of the 13-foot wide screen that, can fit within the 8-foot high frame, be very versatile, used indoors and outdoors. Not only that, if you did get the screen that's 13 feet wide and people were sitting 20 feet away, that's a 36-degree field of view, which is still really nice for movies. And that's the people who are sitting 20 feet away. If you got the 16-foot widescreen and people were sitting 10 feet away from it, they're looking at like a 68-degree field of view, which is like super uncomfortable. Honestly, Ian, I'm still of the opinion that, I'd probably be fine with going with the standard size that's 12 feet wide, but the 13-foot wide screen to me really makes a lot of sense. It gives you like a 168-inch diagonal screen. The projectors you're thinking about using can sort of handle that size. From 20 feet away, you still have a really nice viewing angle. It'll fit into an indoor room. There's all kinds of benefits for it, going with that 13-foot wide size. So that's my vote, Ian. I know it's only one man's opinion. I know you're leaning towards the 16 by 9. If you went with that 16-foot by 9-foot, it would be ground to top of the wall that you have with your 9-foot tall wall, which means that anyone who's obviously you're having more than one row of seating, they won't be able to see the bottom of the screen. It'll be right against the ground. I'm not loving the 16-foot widescreen. It's my opinion, but yeah, that's the way I'm coming at it. He also asked, what do we think of getting a brighter projector like the Optima DU380? He has this limited $650 budget that he could put towards a projector. I'm not a huge fan of that either. You said you have access to a BenQ HT2050 on the screen size that I'm suggesting, which is, I would say the largest you would go is 14 feet wide. Okay, I put that out there last podcast. I'm still sticking to my guns on that. I like the 13-foot wide that you suggested for the indoor-outdoor reasons. if that's the screen size you have, not larger than 14 feet wide, the Optima HD 2050, or it might have been the previous model that the 2050 replaced, but either way, it can handle that screen size. You should be good to go without having to spend this extra $650 on a projector that doesn't have as good contrast, doesn't have as good black levels. You're giving up quite a bit just to try and get more lumens in a business class projector. So I'm not a huge fan of that. And then for Ian's indoor theater, he asked about his Atmos setup. Since he is limited to 9 channels total with his X4100W, he agrees that a 5.1.4 configuration makes more sense than, say, a 7.1.2. So we asked about that last time. But he wants to know, should he label his 4 overhead speakers as top fronts and top rears, or as front heights and rear heights? And can we help him to understand the distinction why they would be labeled that? It's a little bit strange, but basically the front heights, the height moniker, the front height and the rear heights, they're supposed to be used when the vertical angle, so look straight ahead of you, you're looking level straight ahead of you, you call that 0 degrees elevation. Now you go up 30 degrees elevation from there. That would be a height speaker. Now you can go between 30 and 45 degrees elevation. That could be called a height speaker. Whoops, switch back to the wrong camera again. That could be called a height speaker, between 30 and 45 degrees elevation. Now, a top front or a top rear speaker can be anywhere from 30 degrees to 55 degrees. It's weird. There's this weird overlap. So the truth is, you're probably going to label them as top fronts and top rears. The way that he's suggested laying them out in his theater, according to his diagram, he's got a pretty high ceiling. He's got these vaulted ceilings that are pretty tall, and it's all based around the front seats as his primary seats. And he's got these front speakers that are, I don't know, it's looking maybe 3 feet in front of that front row. The rear ceiling speakers that are farther back, I would probably just call them top fronts, top rears, because they're going to fit within the 30 to 55 degree elevation window that is covered by the moniker of top front, top rear. So that's what makes the most sense there. Now, for all of his non-Atmos content, he wants to know, can his X4100W receiver upmix the sound to utilize the overhead speakers? And if so, how does he enable that? The answer is yes. It can use what they call Dolby Surround, the Dolby Surround upmixer. That's exactly what it's there for, is to take stereo content, 5.1 content, 7.1 content, and upmix it to make use of your ceiling overhead speakers. That's what Dolby Surround is there for. On the Denon receivers, on the remote, you have movie, music, and game. You press any of those buttons and it'll bring up a list on your screen of all the available listening modes. And one of them will be Dolby Surround. So you simply select Dolby Surround as your listening mode, and there you go. Now your ceiling speakers are in play. They're being used. And of course, if you're watching actual Dolby Atmos content, then that'll say Dolby Atmos instead of Dolby Surround, and you'll get the discrete sounds that are actually object-oriented sounds that are mixed discretely for those overhead channels. So you'll have that. And I think this is the last question from Ian. So as we discussed last week, he picked up a pair of RBH Impression Series bipole surround speakers. And his idea was to replace his 2 pairs of side surround speakers. He has 1 pair of side surround speakers for each row, his 2 rows of seats. So he was going to replace the 2 speakers on each side wall with just the 1 bipole surround speaker, and have the bipole surround speaker basically positioned between the 2 rows of seats. That was the idea that he had in mind. So we said that this plan would likely sound better for his primary front row of seats, because now instead of the speakers being way up high monopoles that are pointed, straight at the sides, you'd have these bipole speakers that are a little bit behind the front row of seats. But it would be a bit of a compromise for the second row of seats, because now the surround speakers would be in front of that second row. But we thought most people probably don't care about that. Well, he says the people who come over to his place actually do care quite a bit about sound quality. So he's not the only one, and he isn't sure that this compromise would go over too well. So, since he's now planning to change to a 5.1.4 setup instead of 7.1 that he has right now, he could take his current surround back speakers and use them as a second pair of side surround speakers. So we'd have one pair of bipole side surround speakers and one pair of monopole side surround speakers. So how would it sound if you were to use these bipole surround speakers positioned slightly behind the front row, and then a second pair of monopole side surround speakers positioned slightly behind the second row? More or less where they are right now, to be honest. Truthfully, I think that'll be fine. A bipole speaker, it's not the same as a dipole speaker. All right, a dipole speaker, you've got these two sets of drivers. You have two tweeters and you have two woofers on either a dipole or a bipole speaker. In a dipole speaker, the tweeters that are more or less facing towards the front of the room are out of phase with the tweeters that are facing the back of the room. And what that does is it creates a null right in between them. You get a cancellation of sound right there. What it's meant to do is create a very diffuse sound that's hard to localize and pinpoint. Well, a bipole doesn't do that. A bipole fires all of the drivers in phase, which basically means it's just a really wide dispersion speaker. So you basically have one really wide dispersion speaker that's going to be acting as your surround speaker for your front row, and then another speaker that has pretty wide dispersion, not quite as wide, but still pretty wide dispersion, being a regular bookshelf speaker for the back row. Honestly, it should sound completely fine. If you're concerned that you want to make sure that rear row has surround effects that are not coming from in front of the seats, should work absolutely fine. So I'm a fan of that. You already have the speakers. You're not, having to purchase extra. I think that'll work totally fine. All right, so I'm going to wrap up there for this week. I want to mention that Ted and Mark sent in questions that are on our list. We already have those. So Ted, Mark, we will answer you next week. Also got emails from Earl and Jason that came in earlier. I think we have a couple other people who wrote in during the podcast, but all of those fellows, we've received your questions. We'll be answering those next week. So I want to once again thank Lee Overstreet for filling in a little bit short notice. Gave him the heads up there last night. Tom's been away. Hope he's had a good trip. I want to make sure that I thank our listeners of the week. We've got Russell and Ian. Both of those gentlemen went over to avrant.com and clicked on the support the podcast link there. Took them to PayPal. Don't have to have a PayPal account. You can just use a credit card, but they donated to the podcast, helps pay for all our hosting fees and keeps the podcast on the air. And also want to thank David and Scott. David bought a PC 2000 from SVS. Scott bought a VTF2 Mark V from HSU. So a couple really nice subwoofers. They let those companies know that they bought them based on recommendations from us. So thanks so much for supporting the podcast. Now, we are AVRant. We answer your home theater and AV questions. And to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You write to us, question@avrant.com. That's our email address, question@avrant.com. Send us your questions there. You'll be on the podcast. Simple as that. We don't edit. We don't, disqualify anyone's question. You send a question to us, we'll answer it on the podcast. Question@avrant.com. We're also available on Facebook, facebook.com/avrantpodcast. And you can reach us on Twitter. I'm @FirstReflect. Tom is @avrant_Tom, and our producer, Austin, is @AustinPond. Austin is spelled with a T-E-N. So Austin also has his own podcast. It's called We Watch Movies. Super confusing title. They talk about soap, and specifically they talk about the marketing used in soap. Like, is it possible to be fully clean without being Zest fully clean? I mean, they delve into all of that. They really examine the marketing claims made on soap commercials. Maybe there's another soap that can get you fully clean. That's all they're saying. They examine that. We watch movies. What else would we do? So, again, thanks to Lee Overstreet for filling in for Tom. On behalf of Tom Andry, I'm Rob H. This has been AVRant. Now go out and listen to something.